Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Super excited to have a very interesting and exciting guest, Frankie Russo, best-selling author, keynote speaker, two of his books, The Art of Why and Breaking Why, also founder and CEO of Russo Capital, founder of Origin AI and 360 IA, all in artificial intelligence. Frankie, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you.
Yeah, it's glad to be on, Kip. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Well, maybe I usually start with origin story, but before we hopped on, you mentioned your current mantra, love your weird. So maybe let's start with that. Maybe tell us, what
Yeah,
does
just
love your weird
dive
mean?
all the way in.
Yeah.
All right, so Love Your Weird is a movement that I've been a part of and founded over the last 4 years. It started out as a just an idea in back in 2017. I was actually kind of in a not so much a business setting that it came about, but I was going through a divorce and I was doing all this work on what happened and I realized that I had been living a really long time in what I call an inauthentic existence. And it all kind of stemmed from this same thing that kept coming back. And it was this idea of like that kid inside each one of us. And so I don't know if you've had the pleasure of getting to do any that. Sometimes they call it inner child work.
Uh-huh.
But I did hundreds of hours of this stuff. And what came out of it was that essentially, mostly unconsciously or subconsciously, I had been running from this kid that was told he was too weird when he was younger, 5, 6, 7 years old. And so that relationship to that kid has become a huge part of my work now for helping other people unlock that. You see, this most people think weird is like, odd, or it's like this negative thing. Right now, it's kind of getting politicized. But the truth is that you don't have to look weird to love your weird. And that weird is kind of like an inside job. And so, fun fact, when it was first coined, the word weird, it wasn't spelled WEIRD. I don't know if you know this.
No.
It was spelled WYRD, Old English word. And it wasn't just spelled differently, it also had a very different meaning. So, the current version of the word weird, Shakespeare kind of created that with the Weird Sisters and his plays and things like that. But the original word meant the power to control or influence your fate, destiny, and my personal favorite, supernatural qualities.
Hmm.
Yeah, so weird means something very different than most people know. And so I've actually started to do all this work around what can happen inside of an organization when those supernatural qualities, that unique thing that each person has, that also I believe is their genius, what can happen when that's unlocked is pretty powerful. And so a lot of the work I do today is around that. And Love Your Weird has become this nucleus in a framework that I share, I teach, I help organizations with around how do we unlock continuous growth in a world that's really kind of riddled with what I call the stagnation spiral. So a lot of the work that I'm doing now, at the heart of it is this idea that when each person is fully unlocked and fully wholehearted, they're able to step forward in their full genius. And when you do that collectively as an organization, something very powerful happens. And the reason why Love Your Weird is such a big part of that is that most of us aren't wholehearted because we're not showing up with that 5, 6-year-old version of Kip
Uh-huh.
or Frankie, right? So anyway, that's the short, not so short story of what is Love Your Weird.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I mean, the truth is everybody's weird.
That's right.
We really do all have weird stuff inside us. And it's like when you develop levels of trust with people, like that's when you feel comfortable sharing your weird side. But then that's when you really have a deeper connection with people.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I'm always cognizant of. And what's fun is that, over the years, I've found that more and more in the current like state of things, zeitgeist, if you will, people aren't fighting weird anymore. So it's actually been not that big of a lift. When I was going, I used to talk a lot about why and purpose. And all of a sudden, a guy came up to me 3 or 4 years ago. He's like, man, I know you're like starting to do this Love Your Weird thing. I really think you should go all in. He
Huh.
said, you don't want to be just another little Simon Sinek. And that really
Right.
kind of hit me right there. I'm like, oh, dude, he's right. Because when I first came out with The Art of Why, it was 2014 and Simon Sinek's book wasn't that big. And so you get used to people being like, oh yeah, like start with why. It's like, yeah, sure, start with why. So I finally was like, all right, I'm going for this. It was definitely hard for me too, because it was also part of my personal journey of being comfortable with showing up as that. It just kind of created this like huge stake in the ground. And then now that's kind of translated into my kids too. So I have 6 kids.
Oh,
So
wow. God bless
yeah,
you. That's
thank you.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Fantastic.
it's quite a niche. You know, not that many people in my
Yeah.
industry like can compete with that. But what's fun about it is that it's really kind of forced me to look at it differently. So I got remarried, have a great marriage now, and we have 6 kids. I had 3, she had 2. We had one together, Brady Bunch.
Yeah.
And yeah, what's wild about it is that when you start committing your life to a calling of helping adults, usually middle age and up, refine that kid inside of them, it changes the way that you interact with kids that are 5, 6, 7 years old in your house.
Huh.
And it actually was really powerful. We've done all kinds of things. My wife is really big into like really trying to do things differently and create a space where there's zero shame
Uh-huh.
around like what we do here. And we even turn the garage into a wonder lab
Oh,
just to kind
fun.
of create this like space where anything can go. So some days it's hard because it feels like chaos and like it's this kaleidoscope of personalities. And then you're somehow trying to miraculously get them all to move in the same direction. But it's really beautiful. And I've actually been able to take a lot of the work I do with them and then turn around and have a much better understanding of why so many of us abandoned that kid to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's essentially conditioning, like some level of conditioning, sometimes even more extreme than conditioning, like trauma
Hmm.
that's happened to us as a child. But at the very least, conditioning from like school or from parents or things like that of how things should be. We should move away from this divergent, radically imaginative side of ourselves that is
Yes.
actually the raw gold everybody's looking for in organizations and business. Move away from that, which is more ridiculous and not practical, into being able to make it into a math equation or science, or you need to
Uh-huh.
be able to see it and understand it for it to be practical for you to make a living and be somebody in this world. So that's a lot of the work that I'm doing now. It's been exciting. I was able to sell my company to a Fortune 500 360 IA about
Amazing.
almost 3 years ago. Thank you. But what was the best part about that was what it freed me up to finally really go all in on my calling, which is this whole work I do with organizations around continuous growth and limitless growth, and drawing that back to this connection with the 5-year-old genius that is really required to make that growth happen.
Yeah. So how does Love Your Weird play into, or how do you apply that into
Into
infinite
business?
growth and the
Yeah,
growth you're
yeah.
trying to help organizations with?
Okay, so think about it like this. So the problem that I solve, like on paper, is this idea of companies that are falling into stagnation and moving towards irrelevance. Okay, so a lot of companies fall into the stagnation spiral and don't really know that they're in it. And the first, like, kind of way or element of the stagnation spiral is denial.
Hmm.
So, denial is really the first doorway into the stagnation spiral. And then you start seeing other things come to be once you are in denial, like the status quo becomes the norm, right? And acceptable and sometimes even celebrated. Then all of a sudden you have silos, right? Because we need to organize this thing. Then you have these rigid processes. And if you have a company or organizations that are, especially the large ones, right? They've been the market leader or number 1 or 2 in the market for decades. It's there's a culture of this is the way things are going to go, right? Then all of a sudden you get into this level of disengagement that comes from it. So these are kind of the elements or the problems that are the enemy of growth, especially continuous growth. And so that's where a lot of companies find themselves in a lot of organizations. And I found myself in the same boat many times over the last 20 years. And so that's where the work starts, is being able to, okay, first of all, acknowledge that this is happening. So I only work with organizations that are at a place where they can be willing to get honest. That's really the only
Mhm.
requirement is a willingness to get honest, which is actually the doorway into a different loop. So if you think of the stagnation spiral as a cycle, and it continues and it kind of builds on top itself, but it moves in the wrong direction, I had to create a different type of loop. So I call that the infinity growth loop. And the
Okay.
infinity growth loop is what makes continuous growth possible, right? And it starts with a phase of getting honest. So you're getting into the loop by getting honest about the problem that needs to be solved, the problem that we can solve versus focusing on what we can't, and really identifying and aligning around that is critical. Because if you don't have that, you keep solving the wrong problems, and then the other phases don't even happen. So what happens is, a good way to think of it is like this. So there's 3 phases in this loop, and they start with getting honest, and you have to create this space across the organization of authenticity and trust, safety, where people will actually show up and talk about it. And then the other thing that happens is that you end up with this second phase. So this one is equally as important as the first phase, but that's when we're actually trying to come up with novel ideas. Okay, so most people believe that continuous growth comes from success. But the truth is, continuous growth comes from failure, because it's that failure that gets us back into honesty.
For sure.
Right? And out of denial, because we have no choice. So what I wanted to do is help organizations not have to get to that point, not have to go all the way to bottom, which I've done many times. I bottomed out with drugs and alcohol 16 years ago when I got sober, divorce 7 or 8 years ago, lost a company 12 years ago, and I've had all kinds of other things that have happened. And so over time, I'm like, well, what does it look like if we don't have to go down the stagnation spiral and we can catch it like an S curve, where it starts to dip and we can hijack it. And the hijacking of that S curve is the infinity growth loop.
Okay.
So the second phase is about bringing everyone together and really committing and investing in the time it takes to build your own versions of a Wonder Lab, right? A space where imagination, creativity, innovation is welcomed. There's no bad ideas, and it's a space where fear of failure does not exist. So you have to address that first. And then you can get into what I call generous collaboration phase. This is where you're constantly experimenting. You're creating the betas. You're doing things like that. You're going to have failure. And when you do, you just circle back into the loop to reevaluate it and get honest about it. And then you go back in through the loop. And the idea is that if you can create a big enough loop where the organization is continuously doing this, you will naturally continue to grow. And you're constantly evaluating it throughout the entire thing on how does this impact the stakeholders. So everything about this loop becomes about the stakeholders. And I don't mean stockholders. I don't mean the leadership. When I say stakeholders, what I mean is the customers, which could be users, that could be patients, that could be members, the colleagues, which is the people around you in your organization, the team members, and the community. So those 3 C's, customers, colleagues, and community, that's your stakeholders. So everything as you're going through these phases is looked at from that perspective. What are we doing to create something that is of maximum usefulness to the stakeholders, maximum usefulness to the people around us? And so that in and of itself is the short version of the infinity growth loop.
That's amazing. How do you, I guess, first find companies that are open to this? How do you identify the right prospects, if you will, to bring this to bear on?
Well, usually they'll find you.
Okay.
So mostly with the work I do now is that they'll find me. And so a lot of it is about creating a brand and a movement.
Okay.
And a passion for it, right? So like here we are, we're just a couple minutes into this podcast, and already people that just drop in for a second and bail have an idea of what I'm about.
Right.
Right. We skipped all the freaking stuff about my resume and all that other crap. And we may get to it. We may not. I don't really care. You can read my bio on LinkedIn. Okay. But the fact is that you create a space where like people know about this. People are talking about this. Other organizations are talking to other organizations. And so it's somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They will traditionally find you, because that's the thing. Like stagnation spiral, you can just be like kind of in it. You can be a lot in it.
Hmm.
And I try to leave the door open because not everybody, got to remember, denial's the number one factor. So there's not that many people that know they're in it. But if they had a bad couple of quarters, or they're like, oh, I'm worried about AI or something like that, that usually is enough to be like, all right, cool. And I mean, essentially, who doesn't want continuous growth?
Right.
When you look at an organization, they all have the same objectives. Everybody thinks they're special, but they're like, okay, cool. Let me guess. I need to grow my top line revenue. I need my profitability on my statement. I need less employee churn. I need more loyalty from customers. Am I getting it right? Okay, great. So that's everybody. So what I started to do, and a lot of the friends I work with, I've got a lot of friends that are authors and speakers now.
Okay.
And I'm a investor in a group called the Impact 11, which is literally this like collective of speakers that has come together. And I'm actually working on another mission movement that isn't even really out yet, but I'll give you a little insight into it.
Sure.
It's called the New World of Work.
Mm.
And the New World of Work is about architecting a new way to go to work, a new way that is designed around the stuff I've been talking about as like a standard. And that standard becomes this mantra that companies, if they are willing and able to adopt it, I already have this whole collective of speakers that can go into as deep down the rabbit hole around each phase of the infinity growth loop. I've already have them all designed. In fact, let me show you something real quick.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
So how old are you, Kip?
I'm 47.
Perfect. Okay. So you clearly remember Back to the Future.
I clearly do. Yes.
Okay. So you remember when Doc hits his head on the toilet and sees the flux capacitor?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. This is my,
Oh my gosh.
little big napkin. So this is the New World of Work, and this is the infinity growth loop. And
The new
inside
world
of
of
the
work.
loop, yeah, inside the loop are all these words. Now, if you look closely, it's kind of hard to see, but you've got like mattering, belonging, imagination, collaboration, experimentation, fearless, togetherness. Each word on this page is one of my friends. Like
Okay.
they're an expert, and their whole career and calling is dedicated to that. So I started to realize, I was like, wait a second. If a company wanted to, within 12 to 18 months, they could literally bring this collective in and have a full transformation. So that could be fun. So I don't really know exactly what New World of Work will be, but what I do know is that I'm onto something with the flux capacitor. So let's go back to this. What does Love Your Weird have to do with work? And you notice I haven't mentioned anything about Love Your Weird yet in my framework, right?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Love your word in
Yeah. How
the
does
new
what does
world
Love Your
of work.
Weird have to do with the infinity growth loop? Okay. Here we go. Let's go back to the future.
Yes.
So he hits his head on the toilet and he sees this, right? This is,
Yes.
all right.
There it is.
I actually have one of these. I've always been a fan, so it was easy. I just already had it. And so, not that many people are weird and nerdy enough to have this as a 43-year-old, but I do. And so he sees this. This is the flux capacitor, right? This is what makes time travel possible. Okay, which is awesome. So think of this like the infinity growth loop. Just amazing. It can make continuous growth possible. Everything I said to you, you're like, yeah, that makes total sense. This is awesome. Yep, right? All makes sense. What was the problem when Marty got to 1955? Why couldn't he go back to 1985? You remember?
Oof.
All right.
Oh,
Let me get, yeah, go. What you got?
do you not have enough power to? I mean, that's where he tied it up to the lightning bolt, and he
That's
needed
right.
the power
Okay.
to make it happen.
So the problem with this flux capacitor and the problem with the infinity growth loop is that they require a massive amount of energy to actually do what I'm talking about.
Uh-huh.
In fact, for this one, it was 1.21 gigawatts.
Yes.
Remember? And so they
Yes.
had to use plutonium, nuclear plutonium. And then, or if you knew exactly when a lightning bolt was going to hit, then you could be cool too.
Uh-huh.
So it requires a lot of energy. The infinity growth loop is not different. And so what I've come to realize in my work and running the companies I've run is that the secret to being able to run the loop and the loop itself, the conditions the loop itself creates, all kind of center around this one energy source. And that is the collective genius of every single person in the organization unlocked.
That's amazing. For those listening, he like turned on the flux capacitor and it is now flashing light at us.
Yes. And it's being driven by the collective genius of everyone in the organization. It's that collective genius and everyone in the organization activated that fuels the loop. And the loop itself And the core values of authenticity, imagination, and generosity create the conditions for that genius to come out also. So it's this self-fulfilling infinity loop. And what you'll find is that the fastest and most efficient way to unlock that genius inside each person in the organization is to love your weird.
Love that.
Mhm.
Love that.
There you go. So that's how it works. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. So like halfway through my talks, we've got through the strategy, we've got to the infinity loop, with stagnation spiral's been covered. And all of a sudden I flip the whole thing upside down and I'm walking around the floor with everyone telling their neighbor what they were into at 5 years old. Because that's where it starts. That's where it starts, is because there's a lot around our 5, 6 year old self. You may have seen some of this around scientific studies around genius capacity and genius imagination. NASA had one. Have you seen this, Kip?
No,
Or
no,
NASA
no.
does?
Keep going. Yeah.
Okay, check this out. So NASA did a study, and George Land actually did a TED talk on this, and people use this study for different reasons. But the important part was that we're at the late 60s, early 70s. They're in the space race. The United States got together with all the smartest people in the country. And what they realized is that if they don't continuously innovate, they're not going to stay a superpower as a country. And so they were like, all right, we need to create a way to make sure that we're hiring the most genius level people, the people that have that divergent imaginative thinking that can come up with something truly novel. Because if you haven't figured out by now, continuous growth doesn't come from doing the same, it comes from doing something new. So they had to
Uh-huh.
constantly be looking for the new, because that's really what creates these stagnation spirals, is that people think, okay, cool, we're not getting there this quarter. We didn't get there this year. So we must need to do more activity,
Mm-hmm.
more of what worked. And so essentially I call that brute force. So most people are trying to get continuous growth, brute force, more sales, more advertising, more of the same, because that's how we got here, right? We're a multi-billion-dollar company. We're number one in the market. Don't tell us what to do. And so that's what happens, is that you're in this loop of like, cool, we just must not be doing enough. And then we wonder why there's dead bodies behind all these KPIs,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So we have to find a new way. So they knew they had to find new ways to stay the superpower as a country. So they created a test that was a super simple test, and it was to test for this like divergent thinking and measure the genius level of each person that was applying. Over the years, they tested about 100,000 adults. But the test was simple enough that you could actually give it to a 5-year-old. So they took 1,600 5-year-olds, a sample size of the United States, and they gave it to all these different 5-year-olds. All right. Now, what was surprising is that their scores were a lot different than the adults. So the 5-year-olds, what do you think the percentage of 5-year-olds tested at that genius level?
What percentage?
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy. I have no clue. I'd be pulling it out of thin air.
98%.
I would have never guessed that though.
No.
Jeez.
Okay, good.
Wow.
98% 5-year-olds. So they were so excited. They're like, cool, let's make this a longitudinal test. All right. So this is a 10 years old. They brought the kids back at 10 years old, just 5 years later. Just in 5 years, it dropped to 30%.
Oh my word.
Yeah. And then at 15 years old, it was like 12. So everybody out there out in the world's kind of used this test to kind of crap on schools.
Huh. Okay.
Right. And so that's not my mantra, even though my wife has a whole thing on schools, but she can do her own podcast on that.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, the adults, 100,000 adults, 2%.
Jeez.
2%. The same test, these 5-year-olds were getting 98s. And what I started to realize was that imagination, this creativity and innovation is not learned. It's unlearned.
Mm.
Because that was what they were trying to figure out. Is this something
Uh-huh.
that we're born with, or is it something that can be taught? And the reason I bring this up is because so many people don't identify as imaginative.
Right.
And
Right.
so usually I'll start off with like, look, what if I told you, because one of the problems, we don't think we're imaginative. But what if I told you that every single person in this room is imaginative at a genius level, and that there's science to prove it? And that's what created this test. And so from there, we start going down the back half of the experience and into this new world. We're like, okay, cool. So what were we into at 5, and why does that matter? And the reason it matters is because, well, first off, Kip, what were you into at 5?
5. I think probably G.I. Joe and
There you go.
Transformers and cars and racing and being outside, riding my bike.
Okay. And the G.I. Joes, the Transformers, and all this stuff, or being a big race car driver and all this stuff, what was it about that you loved?
It probably was like imagining, setting up battles in my bed with the blankets and making tunnels and having them fight each other and like working out, battles in my mind and in front of me. Total imagination.
And when these battles, was there usually a hero involved?
For sure.
Okay. So it sounds like there was this hero inside of you
Hmm.
at 5 years old. You had this deep desire to want to help people, and you thought and believed that that could happen with crazy, amazing battles, that you could even maybe transform from a car into a person, that you could be a superpower GI Joe, right? Am I getting it right?
You're spot on.
Okay. So here's the thing. If I ask anybody, we could bring anybody we want in the world onto this, and they're going to say, oh, I wanted to be a mermaid, or I wanted to be a teacher, or I liked playing Barbies, or I wanted to be a flying nun or a Captain Underpants. It won't matter. It'll all come back to the same thing. At 5 years old, we were all exactly the same. We not only were radically imaginative, we not only were radically divergent, but most importantly, we believed that anything was possible,
Hmm.
that we could be anything, because no one had told us yet that we can't. We didn't know all the constraints, and that was a beautiful thing. Now, do we want 5-year-olds running America? Not necessarily.
Uh-huh.
However, if 5-year-olds team up with the adult versions of ourselves, that's who we want running this world. That's who we want running our organization. And that's what is the space that allows everyone to show up, even though I'll be honest with you, Kip, right? Doing this like G.I. Joe Transformer fascination is weird for an adult
Uh-huh.
to do. It's
Uh-huh.
weird for an adult to do, especially if there's no kids around. It's just you. I mean, come on. I mean, if
Right.
you're playing with your
Yeah.
kids, that's fine, but that's kind of weird, Kip.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's weird, but there's something to it. And so then you start looking at, all right, what's happening in the zeitgeist right now? We're all of a sudden facing a faster user adoption than ever before to technology.
Hmm.
Okay. And so now more than ever, it's critical that we are going back to that mindset that we had at 5 years old, because guess what? Look around. Now you can put in a one sentence text and make a friggin' movie. Okay.
Right.
They can
Yes.
make deep fakes of us. Like, and we're just getting warmed up. They're just now propping those goofy ass androids up, robots. And if you don't think in 5 to 10 years they can't lay bricks, you're dead wrong. My
Uh-huh.
partner in Origin AI is a robotics company and a futurist, and
Okay.
he's been talking about what's happening now for 10, 12 years. He's friggin' nuts. He's more the Doc Brown. I'm a little more the Marty McFly.
Uh-huh.
But what I've come to realize over the last 3 years of working with him is that this is going to happen in a very different way. And what's happening right now is kind of like the novelty's wearing off. See, before it was like, oh yeah, everything's happening so fast. It's like
Uh-huh.
we're going to be taken over by robots, and now all of a sudden the novelty's wearing off. So here comes the stagnation spiral. Well, it's just Chat GPT, and it's cute, and we can write a story for our kids, but this isn't going to like take my job, or this isn't going to make that big a deal. It's going to happen way later. But it's so important that we're looking at this, because this mindset of anything possible is the best way to look at this unforeseen, unpredictable future that we are stepping into every moment. And there's so many ways that the world could end, right? You know that now, right? There's
Right.
so many options for the world to end. There's so many options for you to, at the very least, lose your job to some other thing, another person, another business, another species now.
Uh-huh.
But there's the regular issues we already have right now with the global stuff and all the stuff that we're dealing with as far as the normal business issues that need continuous growth. And then you invite a new species to that. Okay. Now you're really like talking about some unknowns. And so
Hmm.
a good way to think of it is that, because I didn't know, I'm the type that's constantly wanting to like smash the hype and just chill, man. I just want to chill, like just hang out with the kids. I don't even worry about stuff. But the fact is like I want to make sure I don't get into denial. I got to stay out of my own stagnation spirals. The stagnation spiral didn't come from watching other people. It came from me being in it all the time.
For sure.
And so anyway, think about it like this. Not Einstein, Edison. Edison invents a light bulb, affordable light bulb, right? Well, it took, almost a century for the 100 million households in America to even have the electricity to run the light bulb,
Uh-huh.
right? It's almost a century. Well, then you fast forward, Netflix got to 100 million households in 3.5 years.
Uh-huh.
Instagram got to the same households in 2 years. ChatGPT got to 100 million households in 2 months.
Right.
And most of those, they got in 5 days.
Uh-huh.
5 days, what took a century, not that long ago. Okay. So that's the velocity is the part that we must not ignore, especially as like the hype cycles go up and down. If you look closely, like, trust me when I tell you, first of all, I think we all know it's not going to go away. No one really knows the impact, but over the next 10 years, like, yeah, it might not be 2, 3 years, but most studies are saying that within 2 years, half the US workforce, and this is conservative, will have to completely reskill at the very least. If not, so will there be jobs go away? Yes. Will there be new job creations? Yes. But in a climate and a space of stagnation spirals and a space of like status quo, the problem is that people aren't going to want to step up to do that reskill.
Uh-huh.
And so now, what's the other option? Oh, well, nobody's stepping up, and we need to be able to keep the capitalist machine going. So we'll settle for the new species,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be something along those lines. And so, what are we supposed to do in the face of this? Right? I just recently, my TED talk from University of Florida dropped in July last
Awesome.
month. Yeah, man. And it was the whole thing was about how love your weird is a compass for navigating the AI revolution. Okay. And so my premise of it was like, all right, the best way to beat this machine is to let it win.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by
Interesting.
that is that first of all, it's going to win. So stop fighting it. Stop trying to find the outliers where like, oh, it's not as smart as us in this one category or that category. Okay, cut it out. Whatever it is they haven't solved yet, in no world are they not going to solve it. It's too close to the machine of capitalism driving it. It will succeed. And so what do we do in the face of this? And the answer is that we let it win, we use it, we make it our co-pilot, and we augment with it to create a future where we don't have to be left behind. And that's what this is about. So what does love your weird? Here we go again. What is it that I can do? What is my genius that no other human can do and clearly no other species can do? What is that? And for each of us, we have to look at that. And what is it that we deeply care about, deeply lights us up, and deeply we're good at? And so what I've been looking at is that we think so much that it's about this like skills, when really it's more about what is it that is that unique gold, that genius that I represent, and how can AI help me be more authentic by taking away mundane tasks that allow for me to then be freed up to do what I was meant to do to begin with.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if it can do these jobs, then let it. Then let it. If I'm doing a job that other people can do or other species can do, then what am I doing that job right now? So then all of a sudden you look at from an imagination standpoint, it's an incredible co-pilot for experimentation and for all the different things that it can come together with you on. And then lastly, this idea of generous collaboration and the way that there's the thumbs up.
There it is.
Interact with the world. Because at the end of the day, all of our purpose, right? So going back to little Simon Sinek for just a second,
Sure.
all of our why is the same. And that is to suit ourselves to be of maximum usefulness to the people around.
Yes. Yes.
That is our purpose. That is absolutely our purpose. And I believe that there's only one sin in this world. All right, not to get religious, and this isn't a written down sin anywhere, so we're fine. But there is only one sin in my mind, and that is letting anything get in the way of my maximum usefulness to the people around me. That's it. And if you think about it, that really becomes a true north, because at the end of the day, staying honest about that, as opposed to all the self-centered fears that I might have, or all the things that, because by the way, the main thing that gets in the way of my maximum usefulness is me.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm the main thing that gets in the way of that. So just to be clear there. So what can AI do to scale generosity? I mean, even as simple as like the fact that I can be in 55 languages right now with a perfect dialect using things like HeyGen is incredible. And I mean, I like to just sit and listen to it, especially if you're talking about like, Arabic or Mandarin or some of these like Hindi, some of the really harder languages. I'm not talking about Spanish. And it's amazing. And there's across the globe, people are doing it, right? It's letting healthcare professionals spend more time on what they really love to do. This thing that goes beyond the physical that
Uh-huh.
doctors were originally meant to do, because now you've got AI doing all the like busy work and all of the evaluation type stuff. So it goes on and on. Kids at school now can have their own learning. You couldn't, no teacher had enough time or bandwidth to create a unique learning for each kid, and now you
Absolutely.
can.
Yes.
So anyway, I'm optimistic on it, but only because I went full circle in Doom, and just kind of looked at it and was like, all right, cool. Doomsday is coming. What what can we do? As opposed to just hope that it doesn't happen, or that we somehow figure out where the servers are, go out there, bum rush it, and burn them all to the ground, and go back to 1984 or
Right.
1985, which would be great. I'd love to go back to 1985.
Yeah.
You know,
So
couple
much of this.
broadcast TV stations, couple radio
Yeah.
stations.
Yes.
Good old days, back in the Walkman days.
The good old days. How many centuries do you think people have talked about the good old days when they're in their 40s and 50s to their kids? I'm just
Millenniums, not centuries.
keep right. Keep coming back to, so I'm reading the new biography on Elon Musk right now. I actually listened on Audible, but so
Okay.
much what you're talking about makes me think of him. I mean, loving your weird, having your, child, your 5-year-old self. And obviously he's brilliant, but I mean, he does. I mean, as the story unfolds of all his different businesses and things he's done over life, I mean, it is all of this, and
Yes,
his
he's
approach to
taken it to
AI
the
is just like
extreme.
yours. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I haven't read his book, but I would imagine that his 5-year-old self was a lot like mine. So just so you know, not exactly. So mine was a astronaut, a cowboy, an inventor, and a TV preacher. So
Oh,
all those
wow.
minus maybe the TV
Quite the
preacher.
mix.
There's Elon Musk. Yeah, this is the 80s, back when TV preachers were cool. We didn't know they were stealing the jets and all of our money and all that.
Right. Right.
And I was like, oh, this is
Exactly.
amazing. Look at these guys. They're doing a good thing and they're on TV.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was that weird kid I'm talking about, especially the inventing and the astronaut. Just
Yes.
constantly talking about that stuff. Kids were like, "Can you just shut the hell up and like, can we go play ball or something?"
Uh-huh.
And it was just always this weird thing. And I've built a couple of hoverboards. I've been trying to build a time machine since I was 6 and saw Back to the Future the first time.
You are Marty McFly.
Yeah, like I've been like a wild turn in the basement, like this Wonderlab for the kids. I did the same thing when I was 5 with my parents. There was some crappy room in the basement by the furnace that was mildewing, and I turned it into a lab back then. So
That's
I've
awesome.
always been kind of like that. And so you can imagine how in business, like getting into AI and technology and being able, that was the first time I really invented a product. When I started in
Okay.
business, I started the same way most people do, which is with a service company.
Hmm.
And so you can sell somebody else's product, sell some service. That's usually the quickest way to build $1 million company if you don't have anything. But over time, I really wanted to build something that was an actual invention. And
Uh-huh.
that's when I made this like crazy bold move in 2012 to get into technology, automation, and things like that, that eventually went into machine learning and then eventually AI. But all of that was born out of this deep need or sense of like, I want to be an inventor, even though it made no sense on paper. Nobody needed
Uh-huh.
another tech company, clearly. And then fast forward, I mean, all kinds of iterations. In 2015, went to India to try to, well, first of all, in 2015, I bought my first acquisition of another tech company,
Okay.
which is a very scary but important move. And the next day, I went to India to start a second company. Actually, I didn't go to India to start a company. Let me back up. I went because I wanted to find some outsourced people we could pay via PayPal. And I'd
Okay.
never been to India. Something, this will be fun. We'll go to India. I'm going with the guy's company I bought. I made him the CTO. So we went together. I wasn't there one day, and they were like, dude, that's not going to work here in India. Like they don't trust startups and things like that. You have to be a branch of a company you already have.
Okay.
And we had already made like the Inc. 500 list a couple of times. And so we had like a little bit of like clout. And so I kind of was like, all right, fine. So in 1 week, having never gone to that country before, I started a company, met with the government, leased a building for 3 years, hired construction workers, bought 4 air conditioners and a front door. By the way, you have to bring your own air conditioners and front door in India. You might not
That's
know that.
very interesting.
Yeah, I still own 4 air conditioners. I think they're Mitsubishis. If you're looking for any in India and you're
I'll keep
listening
that.
now,
I'll
just
keep
hit
that in
me up.
mind.
Yeah, hit me up for those. They're mini splits. Anyway, so you had to buy all this stuff, right? And it was wild because I had, I had to get a lawyer. All these things happened. I'd never even been to the country. So you can imagine what it was like flying home from that deal. And
Yeah.
I actually don't put that in my inventor bucket. I put that in my astronaut bucket.
Okay.
Because I mean, for as far as I was concerned, that might as well have been the moon. You know, I mean, it was wild. Luckily, they had one decent hotel. Otherwise, the rest of it, I mean, just looked like a third world country. It was really wild. And to this day, they're still rolling. And ended up
Oh,
that was part of the company I sold and whatnot. But one of the things that I've found over this is that the more we are in touch with who we were as that 5-year-old archetype and the way we can show up, right? Another thing with astronauts, I started learning how to fly a plane.
okay.
Love this anti-gravity concept. So we could go on and we don't have all day, but maybe we'll do it again. But there's something to be said about that part of us, and so it starts with just exploring it, talking about it, looking at it, and a lot of times what you'll find is that some of us are still in that 2%.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? And
Yes.
I find that maybe it's the law of attraction. I don't know, but I end up running into a lot of the people that are in the 2%. The fact is everybody's in the 98
Right.
of that has it. But there's 2% that like are digging it. They're like, yes, love your weird, like
Uh-huh.
forget about every question I had for this podcast. Let's just go into that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so the that's like the biggest thing that I've been finding is that when you create a space where you change the conditions back to what they were before, that genius will naturally just come out. Okay. Yeah.
How do you define success?
First of all, I hate the word success because it's such a cheap word that is so hard to define. It's very subjective.
Sure.
Um, I'll give you the answer from the front of my book, which is that I define success as authentic success, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't tell you much. But I think at the end of the day, success has to be, if we're talking about business. So there's, I mean, success. What a word. Um, I guess in life, success is like your kids and your wife don't hate you, and like in general, you're a good person. I don't know. In business, I think it has a lot to do with the people's lives you've impacted, and maybe it's the same for personal. So success is essentially the the sum total of the people's lives that I've helped and impacted over the course of my life. That's what
Mm.
success is. That's why again goes back to this idea of like maximum usefulness to others is all that really matters, because that's what's going to dictate how successful I am when success is measured by the maximum impact I've had on the maximum amount of people over the course of my life.
Oh, very good. That's excellent.
I guess that's what my definition of success
Yeah.
is.
And maybe we'll kind of leave off with, and you touched on what you've created for your kids, but how are you teaching your kids to like love their weird and keep that sense of their 5-year-old self as they're starting to grow and you're
Yeah. So first of all, you don't have to teach it.
okay.
That's number one. Number two, all you have to do is give permission
Mm.
for them to do what's already inside. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have any rules, but you have a lot less of them. And the rules are like be kind, right? The rules are like have gratitude. The rules are like, yes, you can watch TV in my room. That's an actual 8-year-old that just asked me
Uh-huh.
that that didn't go in the bus to the dentist. So it's just about having honestly less rules. Like, look,
Hmm.
let's have more values and principles and less rules. The values are kindness to each other, gratitude for what we do have, and respect for the people that we're in the care of, right, or that are taking care of us. And beyond that, there's not much that I think really matters once they get to adults, right? You can make all these rules and then they're going to lie to you and hide it from you and all this other stuff. It's like at the end of the day, it's like when you have a space where you have kindness and gratitude and respect for the people around you, and there's this level of like care and love, then everyone is kind of in this condition where we have permission to stay that full self, where we don't
Mm.
have to leave that part of ourselves behind. And so because conditioning, as I said at the beginning, is what makes people abandon our authentic self. It's what makes people abandon this kid to begin with. Then it's conditions that will also just bring it back out. It's been there the whole time. You just haven't had permission and a space where you, at least temporarily, every so often, allow yourself be back in that, to stay connected to it. And so that's essentially what we do, to just let them know how important it is. And we celebrate the things that are already there that they're doing, and, letting them rip up, because I mean, I say Wonderlab, really, it's just a space where they can rip everything to shreds. Uh, look, if you're OCD like I used to be, I've kind of gotten a little bit better at it.
Uh-huh.
It is a daily thing as an adult to continually come back to give them and myself permission for this stuff. It's because it's very natural to kind of slip back out of it.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, good. Well, this was awesome, Frankie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my pleasure, man. This was fun. Sorry, I feel like I kind of rambled a lot. Hope that's okay.
No, this was absolutely perfect. Yeah, and we'll have all your contact info and socials in the show
Sure,
notes
sure,
here,
yeah. Just
but
Google me.
yeah, Frankie Russo, love your weird. Everybody, check out Frankie. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. This was hugely valuable. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Kip. Look forward to talking soon.
All right, you bet. Thanks.